Hello, I am Mystic Orange and this is video hashtag 627. In this video, I want to rank the voices of Winx Club. However, I want to only rank the voices of the first four dubs. So that includes Cinelume, Focus Dub, Nickelodeon, and Dubbing Brothers. I was actually planning to do this ages ago, but I forgot about it. I was actually planning to do this after my season 3 review, and then I found out know of this previously, and now I've acknowledged I forgot to do this. But since it's here, let's get on with it, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's get into it. So what I was planning to do after the season 3 review is that I really wanted to rank the voices of each characters from different dubs. And I mainly wanted to do this for the first four dubs since believe that the first three seasons and the first movie is like a whole arc. So that's why I wanted to do this. Additionally, this is where the Focus dub, ended. So I think it will be interesting to compare the voices of the first four dubs. However, I think I'm going to include only the characters that were in the movie. So I won't talk about characters that didn't appear in the movie. For example, Naboo. I know he showed up towards the end, but I don't think he made a huge impact in the movie. Additionally, I don't think I'm gonna include characters that weren't voiced by Cinelume or Focus. I'm aware in the first movie it's only voiced by Dubbing Brothers and Nickelodeon, so characters like Bartleby will not be included. I also don't think I'm gonna include characters that didn't make a huge impact in the show, because I think characters like Oritel and Marion, even though they had the cameos in the first three dubs, I don't think they made a huge impact. So I am aware there was that story that Valtar made up, and Marion and Oritel did make their voices, but I don't feel like the voices were important in the scenario. And I acknowledge that Focus and Cinelume would not be including those two. But I'm also aware, Dubbing Brothers and Nickelodeon have voiced those two. So all that considered, here are the following characters that I will be talking about in this ranking video. So obviously, I think I'm going to talk about the first six, Winx girls. And I'm also going to talk about the specialist counterparts apart from Naboo. I will also talk about the four teachers, as well as Daphne, Mike and Vanessa, and Murta, who also have voiced in the movie. I will talk about the Pixies apart from Perth and Glim, and I also will be talking about the three ancestral witches because I do believe, in Cinelume and Focus, in the end of season 3, they do make impactful voices. Also, from the Pixies, I am also going to omit Zing, because I believe she didn't show up in the movies. I also think that each voice actor brings a personality to the characters. Anyway, we're gonna start this off with Bloom. So Bloom is the fairy of the Dragonfire. So based on my criteria, I think Bloom has 5 voice actors. So Bloom has a Focus voice actor, a Nickelodeon voice actor, and a Dubbing Brothers voice actor. However, in the Cinelume dub, I think she has 2 voices. The first one is from season 1 to season 3, but in season 4 she has a different voice actor. So I want to let you know, if I'm ranking these voice actors, I'm not only voicing their voices, I'm voicing their personality that portrayed by these characters. I think for Bloom, season 4 Bloom should be placed at 5th spot. So out of these Blooms, I think season 4 Bloom is my least favorite version of her. For me, I feel like season 4 Bloom feels like an aftermath for what happened in the first movie. I feel like in the first movie, Bloom, finished her arc. I feel like that first movie is the finale of Winx Club. Like you can say that season 3, episode 26 is the finale, but for me, I feel like that's the final episode, but not the finale. Like it's not the finale of the whole show, and I feel like the movie is. For me, if Bloom, finished her arc, she ended her journey, and I feel like she resolved her issue by freeing the people in Domino, and she got her parents back, and I feel like she settled her personality. I think what I would appreciate it from season 4 Bloom is seeing her struggle, seeing her adjust to her new life as now that her home life and family are back together. I would have loved to see Bloom readjusting to her life as a princess, but also being a normal person again. I think similar to Stella or Layla, who are normal princesses in their home worlds, and I think it would be nice to see like Bloom finally finding normalcy in her new life. But I feel like season 4 Bloom, with addition with her voice actor, she feels like a complete different person, and I feel like season 4 Bloom really comes across as morally righteous person. This is how I feel about Twilight. When after I think it's when Twilight became an Alicon. That was a season 4. And season 5 is when we have a character like Starlight Glimmer, and this is where we meet Starlight Glimmer, and I think that's where she's a bit more antagonist. But then in season 6 of My Little Pony, I think we have Starlight Glimmer trying to reform herself. But I feel like Twilight Sparkles, after her being an Alicon, she does seem like she's a morally righteous person, and she can do no wrong, or at least that's how it comes across. And that's similar to Bloom as well. Like when she's, trying to train someone like Roxy, or when she's, telling off her friends off, for interrupting her with her session with Roxy. I don't know. It feels like Bloom has a big inflated ego in season 4. So at first spot, I'm kind of debating if I want to replace Nickelodeon Bloom or the movie Bloom, but I come to a decision of placing the movie Bloom in the spot. So movie Bloom appears in 3 movies. That's Secret of the Lost Kingdom, Magical Adventure, and Secret of Abyss. I haven't fully been exposed to, Mystery of Abyss, and it's been a while I've watched Magical Adventure, but have watched Lost Secret of the Lost Kingdom. I think for me, for movie Bloom, is that I do think she's friendly and pleasant, but I feel like she doesn't have much of a personality. I feel like for the other blooms that are gonna be above, I feel like they're a little bit more interesting in comparison to movie bloom, which is understandable. I feel like in the movies, Bloom's personality isn't the focus; it's her story that's a bit more in focus. So we didn't get like enough of like Bloom's personality shining through. Also, if I'm referring someone as movie Bloom or movie Stella or whatever, I mean it because they be voiced by dubbing brothers. I think at third spot I'm gonna place Nickelodeon Bloom. I think I'm have a conflicted feelings about Nickelodeon Bloom because I think for me personally, season one to season four Bloom of Nickelodeon, I do think she does come across as like comforting and calm when she's speaking, which I do like about Nickelodeon Bloom. But there is something I find present about her throughout her Nickelodeon Bloom. And I think, in season five and season six, we still have Nickelodeon Bloom. And I think she still remains her like calmness and comfortingness sometimes when she's present. However, I think for Nickelodeon Bloom, she does feel like a stereotypical Nickelodeon main character. So, like, when I'm thinking about Nickelodeon Bloom, I think of characters like Tori Vega from Victorious, or Carly Shay from iCarly, or Zoe from Zoe 101. That's the archetype of characters I think of when I think of Nickelodeon Bloom. Which isn't a bad idea. I just think that's how I notice her, and I think people, portray Nickelodeon Bloom as perfect Bloom. I think that's not it. I think season four Bloom feels like she's perfect and all that. I think for Nickelodeon Bloom, it's not that she sounds like she's perfect and all that. It just feels like she's like, a Nickelodeon stereotypical main character. And I feel like I think it's kind of injustice, to also portray Tori Vega, Colin Shay, and Zoe as like also these things because they're not perfect either. It's as I guess you can say like they have less personality than compared to their like friends. So I think it's that like it's a shame because I think Tori Vega is a bigger example of that. I don't think Tori Vega is personalityless. It's just that her friends are a bit more quirky, a bit more interesting. And that's with Bloom. I feel like Bloom doesn't have. I think Nickelodeon Bloom doesn't have that much like hobbies. I feel like because I remember like at least in Cineloom or Focus Bloom, she did enjoy artwork or like she enjoyed those things. I think Nickelodeon Bloom doesn't have much of like her hobbies or interests, and it would be appreciative if like we could see Nickelodeon Bloom having those things. Like if your friends like Stella is into fashion, Layla is into like athletics, it would be nice to see Bloom, enjoying something that she's into. Similar to like Tori Vega, I think it's kind of harsh because if Tori Vega has her interest too, like she's into singing, but her friends have a different quirks to Tori Vega. Like Robbie, he likes doing puppetry. Jade is into horror, so that's the basis. I think the words that I'm looking for is that Nickelodeon Bloom feels like the normal one. Like the normal one archetype. And this is how I feel about Tori Vega as well, from Victorious as well. Like, yeah, she's the normal one, and her, her friends are like different quirky personalities. And that's the same way how I feel about Nickelodeon Bloom. Despite that, I feel like season six version of Nickelodeon Bloom, I do think she's a bit more annoying. Maybe if I, suddenly talk about season six, I will probably talk about the characters' personalities because I do think their personalities is a little bit more annoying in season six. However, when I say little bit, I mean a lot because they are really annoying in season six. But I feel like I can't do Nickelodeon. Like I can't um, be harsh on Nickelodeon because I think season five was good, I don't think season six or the specials were good. That's my opinion. But I think it's really complex. Like I think those things from Nickelodeon didn't really do them justice. But I do think like season three, season four, and season five, and maybe the movies were good from Nickelodeon side. So we got two versions of Bloom left. And I'm just gonna make it simple. At second spot, I'm gonna place Cinnalune Bloom, so that's season one to season three Bloom of Cinnalune Dub. And number one is obviously Focus Bloom. Also, when I say refer Bloom as Cinnalune Bloom, I'm referring her to season one to season three. So bear that in mind. But I do find it interesting that both of these versions of Bloom are like closer to the top spot, and Cinnamon Bloom just missed the mark of meeting the first spot. I think it's because like both of these versions of Bloom, take part in season one all the way to season three. They do not show up in like future seasons or movies. So like even in the Cinnalune version, even though like season four Bloom is like a different like she's still Cinnalune Bloom. She is voiced by a different voice actor, and therefore I feel like season four Bloom feels like a unique person to season one to season three. So that's my mindset. So I think it's easy to compare Cinnaloom and Focus Bloom. But both of these blooms have something that I miss about, season one to season three bloom compared to the other blooms. And that's the fact that, like, Bloom in the first three seasons felt more like an insecure person and, like, not insecure in a bad way, insecure, like, in a good way. But I do believe that both of these blooms have something that in common, and that's like having an imposter syndrome. Not only that, I feel like there's always trauma troubling Bloom in the first three seasons. And you can't help but feel sorry for Bloom for whatever happened to her like throughout her life. I think like for both of these versions, it's about her journey, figuring out her true self and what her like origins are and where she came from and like figuring figuring out like all like effects that she has had throughout the first three seasons. But there is a reason why I place Fox's Bloom higher than the Cinnalune Bloom. It's because, in comparison, I think I guess both of them are inconfident, but I feel like Cinnalune Bloom feels less inconfident, and I feel like she seems more like a goody two shoes in comparison to Fox's Bloom. I think for me, Focus Bloom feels a bit more emotional and raw with her, I guess, emotions. Like you really can feel her like emotions when she's crying about like her whatever incident happened to her. Like for example, like if Dragonfire is taken away from Bloom, you really feel her like emotions. Or when she's telling Daphne that she's willing to do what it takes to get the Dragonfire back, you really feel the weight of her emotions. And I feel like Cinnalune Bloom doesn't seem confident enough for that, I feel like. And I think what gives the Focus Bloom the edge of, taking the first spot is that I feel like um, Focus Bloom is allowed to make mistakes. And she's allowing herself to be vulnerable. And this is how I feel like the Cinnalune Bloom is kind of lacking in that department. So that explains why she's at second spot. And the first spot is obviously Focus Bloom. And I have to say, like, Focus Bloom is my personal favorite Bloom. And I just think the other Blooms do not compare to Focus Bloom whatsoever. Like what I said before in my second spot with Cinnamon Bloom and the things I've added with Focus Bloom, yeah, there's more to Focus Bloom than just that. I think the voice acting of the Focus Bloom really does her justice. And I think whenever she's angry, you really feel her. And, I think the voice acting, she really does a good job of, like, portraying her. Like, I also think, like, when Bloom became evil, like, Dark Bloom, the Focus Bloom really helped portray, like, um, Bloom's bitterness. And you really felt like her personality really shifting, but it felt like eerie and scary. Like it felt familiar, but it's like a void of emotions, and it's like the dark version of Bloom. It's like her shadow self forming. If you know in psychology, there's this thing about like ego self and shadow self. Ego self is the thing that you portray outwards, and the shadow self is the dark part of you that's showed back. Is the one that you want to hide. You show your ego self so you don't show your shadow self, and this is what it feels like for Bloom. And I really find that really fascinating. Like when she became dark, you really felt like her shadow self just came out, and like you really saw like her. It's like her outer self just went inwards. And when the girls, really try, seeing the inner side of Bloom once again, I think that's the thing. So if you told me to recast any version of Bloom once again for throughout the whole series, I would just say stick to Focus Bloom because she's number one, and I think she's just irreplaceable. The next character we're going to talk about is Stella, the fairy of Sword and Moon. For Stella, she also has five voice actors. Like, of course, she has one for Cinelim, Nickelodeon, and Dubbing Brothers. However, for Focus, she has two voice actors. One of them is who voices Stella throughout season 1 to 3. However, there is that one episode in episode 2 of season 3 where Stella has a different voice actor. I think at the first spot, I will place movie Stella. I don't think there's anything wrong with movie Stella. It's just that I do feel like movie Stella does feel a bit like Pinkie Pie, which there's nothing wrong with that. I just think um, Stella seems a little bit more immature than usual. Like particularly during the domino scene when she's like going through Butterbee's book, um, she did like try to interrupt Buttlebee, and she just wanted to see like it was Bloom's baby pictures and things like that, and she did seem to want to listen to the boring stuff. Ultimately, Stella's really fun in the movies, but I don't think, we get the full picture of Stella. Like, there's not enough meat on the bone. Which is a shame because this is how I felt about movie Bloom as well. Like, we only get a bit of, like, Stella's personality because, yeah, it's kind of understandable. Like, we only get the movie, you won't get the full version of your character. I think at first spot, I will place Focus Season 3 Stella. The one that showed up in the second episode. I think I want to place this version of Stella here. We only get one episode on her. I feel like this version of Stella reminds me of Rarity. She does sound cute, bubbly, and fun. And I recognize like this version of Stella uses like terminologies that Rarity would. Like she sounds kind of British slash American. I forgot the terminology for it. Is it mid Atlantic? Well, whatever it's called, I think it's really funny, like what Stella uses in her this version, like the words she says, like for example, like snafus or we mustn't dally. I do find that interesting for this version of Stella. I think this version of Stella adds an accent, which makes this version of Stella a bit more diverse in the way she speaks, which I do appreciate. I would appreciate if characters did have like distinctive accents. I think it's nice to have. But because this version of Stella is short lived, this is why she's placed here. Now, after all the short-lived Stellas, we now have Stellas that stay a bit longer. And at third spot, I will place Nickelodeon Stella. And just like the movie Stella, this version of Stella, does seem a bit immature sometimes. It can be hard to take her seriously, but it's also it seems like this version of Stella doesn't take things seriously, especially in moments when she needs to be serious. I think I've noticed it a couple of times in like earlier seasons, like in season one, two, and three, like in the specials as well. But I've seen it sometimes, in season three and season four. But like I also seen it carried out to like season five and six. But I think it gets worse in season six. However, Nickelodeon Stella does have some like redeeming qualities though, which I do appreciate. Like whenever she is emotional and does care about other people, she does seem to like seem a bit more mature than usual. I also feel like Nickelodeon Stella feels more like a regression from her growth of season one to three. At second spot, I will put Cinelim Stella. I do have conflicted feelings about this Stella. In one hand, I do feel like this Stella seems the most antagonistic of the Stellas. It does seem like the most times I've seen her in the Cinelim Stella, she's kind of mean spirited. She is kind of selfish sometimes. And I feel like this version of Stella has inspired the live action version of Stella. I think her antagonistic version just ramped up to 11. And I couldn't blame the live action version of Stella. Like if I was the writer of the live action version of Stella and I've only seen like season one of Stella in the Cinellian version, I couldn't blame you if you thought like Stella was like the antagonist. Like this is how you think Diaspro would be like. However, in the other hand, I also think this version of Stella had the most growth, especially in season three. Like when she's trying to save her father, you really felt her emotional rawness when trying to break free Radius. If she didn't have that emotional growth in season three, I would place this version of Stella right at the bottom. At that top spot, this is really obvious, is Focus Stella. She's number one for me. And this version of Stella is what Cinelim Stella wishes she could be. And yes, Focus Stella was sometimes antagonistic, but I think she was also kind, caring, and friendly towards her friends. She was bubbly. She like when she first saw Bleem, she was like really she really wanted her to come to Althea. I think like this version of Stella is fun to be around. And yes, she makes mistakes. That's the point of her character. I think that's why I feel like this version of Stella is so much better. Like I remember that scene where Stella was like roasting her friends. Like remember, especially Musa. But like I think there's a comparison between Cinelume Stella doing that and the Focus Stella doing that. I think for Focus Stella, yes, she was kind of like a little bit antagonistic. She did push the envelope sometimes, and yes, you could see like she was under a spell. But even if she wasn't under a spell, I do think this version of Stella, like, she didn't mean. I think she's trying to poke fun, but I don't think she was trying to be mean about it. I do think like she stepped over the boundaries, but I think she didn't mean to, and I think she did apologize and she did grow out from that. I think with this version of Stella, you can you can see that she makes mistakes, and you can tell like she's trying to learn from them. This also reminds me the time where Stella, sometimes pushed Layla away sometimes in season 2. Like for example, like she didn't acknowledge that Layla was one of them in her group, but I think she did out of accident. She didn't mean to. She I think this is kind of like Stella's accidental moments. Like she sometimes forgets like, oh, there's six of us, not five. Like it can happen, but I feel like a Cinderloom Stella isn't as like apologetic of her situation, and I feel like Focus Stella is, which therefore sums up my point that this version of Stella is number one. And additionally, think if you're a fan of Winx Club and Stella was your favorite character, it's possible that Focus Stella was your favorite. Not only was she had those things, I thought that Stella from Focus was the most funny of the characters. What do you guys think? The next character I want to talk about is Musa, the fairy of music. So how should I go about this? So how am I gonna go about saying this? I think there's four versions of Musa. I think there's a Cinely Musa, Focus Musa, Nickelodeon Musa, and Movie Musa. But there's a little bit of an asterisk there. I think in Cinelume, she has like so many voices for her. And this is why I'm gonna go right off the bat by placing all of the Cinderloom voices in one spot, and I'm gonna place them at first spot. I'm sorry. And it's not like with Bloom where like she has just a season 4 voice. Like no, like Misa has like bajillion voices for her in Cinderloom. And it's not like in Fox's dub where like in season 3 like Stella has that one voice actor that changed. So I can let that Stella pass, but this is like ridiculous. Like I had to research Winx Club Newsflash just to know like the different voice actors for Misa for Cinelume. And I feel like this affects Misa's personality in Cinelume as a whole. I just feel like Misa in general always felt directionless in the Cinelume version, and I feel like she never felt her personality when in comparison to like Nick Misa or Focus Misa. And to be honest, with that, so many voice acting and different voices for Musa, it does seem a little bit confusing to listen. And I also feel like from all of the Cinelume voices, it never captured, Musa being like rough around the edges. I never got that essence from her from the Cinelume dub. but I did get that from her from like Nickelodeon and Focus Dub. So be it, Cinderella Musa is getting the fourth spot. At third spot, I will place the movie's Musa. This Musa does not feel like Musa at all. This Musa feels like a complete different character. And this is how the best I can describe movie Musa. She seems like a theater kid, or like if you imagine like Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, she sounds too melodramatic. I also do think that Nick Musa and Farkas Musa are capable of doing melodrama, but I think movie Musa just it feels so off to me. And I feel like this really portrays when Riven sliced Musa. And Musa responds to Riven saying things like, "Oh, how could you do this, my love?" It just feels so weird. At second spot, I will place Focus Musa. Arguably, I would say that both Nick Musa and Focus Musa are the only Musas that I like. I think both of these Musas really portray the rough around the edge personality. I think for Focus Musa, they really gave Musa so many slang and 2000s nostalgia. She sounds like a stereotypical hip hop fan from the 2000s. And in general, I think Focus Musa, like, I think more of her music taste tends to be hip hop. It's what I noticed, and it also incorporates in her powers as well. Like whenever she's making like a musical sound, it's usually like a hip hoppy sound. Additionally, I do believe like Senelu Musa has a bit more classical edge to her, and Nick Musa has a pop rocky sound to her. That's how I can compare them by music. So Cinelim is classical, Focus is hip hop, and Nickelodeon is like pop rock. I do think like if you weren't around the 2000s era, you would think like Focus music sounds confusing because she's using lingos that were used in those eras. But at the same time, like if you're like our 2000 kids or like 90s or 80s kid, you would find Musa cringy because she's using lingos that you find familiar, but you think it's like over popularized. I personally don't mind this. I think it's really funny, and I think it brings charm to Musa. And in general, I feel like because of those things, it makes Musa seem like the funny one. And this is what I feel about like Musa in general, like in Focus and Nick. She seems more like a realist. I think that's what doesn't capture in the other versions of Musa. Like she's not afraid of giving characters like reality checks, especially towards Stella. And our first spot is Nickelodeon Musa. Like I said with the Focus Musa, I love Nickelodeon Musa because of her like rough around the edge personality. I think it's unique to her. And I also like that she's a realist and she, points out reality checks onto characters like Stella. But the reason I put this version of Musa at the first spot for me, well, firstly, I feel like this version of Musa really captures Misa's snarky nature or sarcasms. Yes, she has that in the Focus version, but I think in this version, she really goes above and beyond with it. And if I have to compare, she reminds me of Daphne from What's New Scooby Doo. She really captures like the snarky nature of her personality. And it really makes, Misa witty and fun to listen. This is especially true in season 5, where I do believe she uses a bit more sarcastic nature in that season. But the reason I don't put the Farkas version at first spot is because I do believe Farkas Musa shares the same voice actress with Icy, Digit, and Mitzi, and I do believe I don't like having voices shared with multiple characters. So I wouldn't blame you if you thought like Musa sometimes sounds like Mitzi or Digit sounds like Musa or Icy sounds like Musa. I think they do a good job of like voicing like Icy and Musa differently, but it does sometimes seem that way for like Mitzi and hearing Musa's voice. And to me, I just think Nickelodeon Musa is just perfection. The next character I want to talk about is Tecna. For Tecna, I think there's six versions of her. She has a Nick version of her, the movie version of her. However, in the Fox dub, she has two voices. She has a voice for season 1 to season 2, and then she has one for season 3. So I'm going to refer to the first one, Focus Techno Part 1, and I'm going to refer to the second one, Focus Techno Part 2. Also in the Cinderloom dub, she also has two versions of her. And just like Musa, there's a little bit of asterisk with that. And just like the Focus one, there's Cinderloom Techno Part 1 and Cinderloom Techno Part 2. And I think Cinellium Tecna Part 1 is the one with the asterisk. I do think this Tecna, has that same voice actor throughout season 1 and then partially in season 2. However, there are some moments where I think Tecna has a different voice. I even checked Winx Club Newsflash to check if I'm correct. And indeed, I am. I think there are moments in like a couple of episodes in season 1 where Tecna has a different voice actor. For example, I think in episode 5, she has a distinctive voice. And because this voice is minuscule and unrecognizable, I think I'm gonna lump every voice from season 1 as one voice. And because of that, I think this really reflects on Tecna's personality in season 1. And right off the bat, this kind of explains my sixth spot. And yes, our sixth spot is Cinelim Tecna Part 1. In comparison to Cinelim Musa, I don't think it's as egregious. However, this does make Tecna feel directionless and unfocused. Additionally, it does feel like the voice actor of this version of Tecna feels unconfident in her speaking. It does feel like she's just reading off the script. And honestly, I do feel like this version of Tecna sounds so boring. So I can understand if you grew up with the Cineloom dub, Tecna would probably your least favorite. But I didn't grow up with the Cineloom Tecna, I grew up with the Focus Tecna. And Tecna has always been my favorite because I grew up with the Focus version. And now it's time to explain the second and the third spot. I think I'm going to place Focus Tecna Part 2 in second spot and Focus Tecna Part 1 at third spot. I think Focus Tecna has a second name to her, and this British Tecna. Because in the Focus dub, Tecna has a British accent, which I do love. I love characters with distinctive accents. We need more shows with accent diversity. I grew up with Focus Tecna and she has always been my favourite. I loved her ever since from season 1. So I am that rare person and I am kind of biased about this version of Tecna. While I do love Focus Tecna, there is a reason why part 1 is at third spot. So to repeat again, Focus Tecna Part 1 voiced her from season 1 all the way to season 2. I wouldn't blame you if you thought this version of Tecna sounds a little bit more of an adult and less of a teenager. I remember some guys pointing it out, but I could not able to unhear it. I also feel like this version of Tecna feels a little bit more higher than I'd like her to be. Especially when she's screaming and yelling, sometimes her voice can be higher than Stella's. It can throw me off when Tecna is with a high voice, and I always prefer Tecna with a deep voice, like I said about the movie Tecna. And this is why I prefer Foxy's Tecna Part 2 a little bit more. I think she sounds a little bit more calmer in her voice. And yes, she does sound like a teenager a bit more. Not only that, I think this version of Tecna sounds cuter, which I do like. I also think Fox's Tecna Part 2 sounds the most smartest. And at number one spot, at top spot for me, it should be Cinnalum Tecna Part 2. And just so you know, this version of Tecna lasted from season 2 all the way to season 4. I will say that this version of Tecna would benefit from having a deep voice like the movie Tecna, as well as an accent like the Focus Tecnas. But despite that, this is the best Tecna overall. I think I love this Tecna the most for giving Tecna the best character development in the whole show. And I stand by that statement. Tecna from Winx Club has the best character development because of this voice actor. And I think this version of Tecna really helped Tecna feel a bit more vulnerable with her friends and the people she cares about. For openly crying towards Timmy in her Charmix episode, to sacrificing her life for her friend in her Enchantix episode. And for that, she remains at number one spot for me. The next characters I want to talk about is Flora, the fairy of nature. For Flora, we have 4 versions of her. So that's Focus Flora, Nick Flora, the movie Flora, and Cinnalum Flora. At first spot, I want to place Cinnalum Flora. And just like Cinnalum Musa, it does feel like Cinnalum Flora has a billion of voices. However, unlike the Cinnalum Musa, Cinnalum Flora has only one voice actor. Flora does have a different voice actor in season 4. However, I will still count like Cinnalum Flora as one Flora. Because I do believe that voice actor still has the same problem as the original. By the way, I highly recommend checking out Winx Club Newsflash video about this. I will link that video in the description. At third spot, I will place movie Flora. I have to be honest, I really don't like this version of Flora. She really makes Flora sound really weak and pathetic in the movies. She sounds really whiny and distressed. I think my least favorite thing about the movie is where like Flora, got hurt by her own vines. Like those are the vines that she created, and when a monster tried to slice her vine, like she was all weak and pathetic. Like she never had this problem before. I remember moments in the Winx Club where like Flora did create plants and monsters did slice them, but she didn't feel the effect of the plants. Because it's her creation. And at second spot I will place Focus Flora. I really like Focus Flora. I think she has a really interesting personality and she's really nice. From what I get from the Focus Flora, she reminds me a lot of like characters like Fluttershy from My Little Pony. She has a similar sweet and soft-spoken voice. I especially love her voice in season 1. While she might sound like Fluttershy, this version of Flora still has hardship to her voice. I also think like Focus Flora has a bit of a sassy personality. She may be sweet, but you better not mess with her. And at first spot, I will place Nickelodeon Flora. I especially love her voice when she's calm and peaceful. I think with Nickelodeon Flora, she really brings out her therapeutic side. I think Focus Flora has a similar effect, but I think it's a bit more present in Nick Flora. And you could see, like, because of Focus Flora sounding a bit like Fluttershy, it can be distracting. With the Nickelodeon Flora, she doesn't have that problem. So with that, I think Nickelodeon Flora just sounds fine. And then we're going to talk about Layla, the Fairy of Morphix. And for Layla, there's four versions of her. So at first spot, I will place the movie Layla. I don't think there's anything wrong with Layla in this version. I do like the accent of her voice. I just feel like this version of Layla gets sidelined the most. While watching the movies, it seems like movie Layla is the least focused. At third spot, I can't decide if I want to place Nick Layla or Cinnaloom Layla. In one hand, I think the Nickelodeon version matches Layla's voice. You can tell in this version the voice actress is using African American accent for the voice. And it reminds me of characters like Claudine Wolfe from Monster High. I think what I noticed about Nickelodeon Layla is that, she struggled emoting. When it comes to anything emotional with her voice, it doesn't come through. So maybe Nick Layla should be lower. Also, fun fact, Nick Layla is also referred to as Aisha. In fact, in the original Italian dub, she is actually called Aisha. And from Nickelodeon dub onwards, they referred her back to Aisha. But since the Focus dub, is ingrained in my memory, I've always called her Layla. Also, in my opinion, I do think they either spell her name wrong or they pronounce her name wrong. I think I mentioned this before in my when I reviewed the specials. I just want to let you know there's two spellings. There's Aisha and there's Ayesha. The AI spelling is supposed to be pronounced as Aisha, whereas the AYE spelling is supposed to be pronounced as Ayesha. As an ex-Muslim Bengali, I know what I'm talking about here. And then we have Cinnaloom Layla. I think for her voice, it doesn't match Layla. Because when I'm listening to her voice, it doesn't pick up that, she's, African American. For me, she sounds like another white girl. I think if you put her voice under Flora, I don't think you'd ever tell the difference. Also, Cinnaloom Layla sounds like the least confident of the Laylas. When I think of Layla, what her strong personality is, I think of her as a strong, independent person. And I feel like that personality doesn't come through from the Cinnaloom Layla. Also, I feel like Cinnaloom Layla sounds a little bit more whiny. I think this is really present in season 2. Like, for example, whenever she calls out for Musa, whenever she is stressed. Like, for example, I think, in her Charmix episode, it didn't make sense to me why Layla kept, calling out for Musa. I do understand that, Musa and Layla have, made a strong bond in the season. But it seems like Layla only cares about Musa. And no one else like Flora, who she also made strong bonds with. But in comparison to Nickelodeon Layla, I think she's better at emoting. It's kind of debatable for me, really. But I had a long thought about it, and this makes me want to place Cinnaloom Layla at third spot and Nickelodeon Layla at second spot. So all that considered, let's move on to the first spot. And that first spot, it belongs to Fox's Layla. I mean, let me spell it out to you. Fox's Layla is the best Layla. She is just perfection, in my opinion. And here's why. I just love Layla's deep, velvety voice. It's so rich and raw. I think this version of Layla is really good at making herself sound strong yet vulnerable at the same time. Like you really can tell this is an independent girl right here. And I think this voice, really fits Layla. Being considered that Layla is like a black African American girl. So there you have it. Foxy's Layla is at a top spot for me. Noticing how long this video is getting, I think I'm gonna cut it right here. I think I'm gonna do the other characters in the future videos. So you could say this is me ranking the golden era of Winx girls' voices. I think for the next video, I'm just going to rank the specialist voices. But only the main five specialists. I'm not gonna include Naboo. So if you want to watch out for that video, make sure to like, share and subscribe and have a lovely day.